Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Waking Up Spiritually podcast. My co-host Gregg Kirk and I are so glad that you can join us today. I'm Wendy Rose Williams, and I'm a past life adventure guide. I help people release energy that doesn't serve them anymore. Things like chronic pain, anxiety, depression, and also getting that creativity flowing again and unstuck. Perhaps you've wanted to be an author and just have not been able to fully step to the plate with it, as an example. My website is wendyrosewilliams.com, and I'll turn it over to Gregg Kirk, who's going to introduce himself in today's topic.
Hello, everyone. I'm Gregg Kirk. I do energy work. I do physical treatments for people with chronic disease, and I do both in-person and remote energy sessions to help people unlock any blocks to their healing or their personal growth. I run an online group healing circle that we do every Sunday at noon Eastern time. And you can check all of this out by coming to my website, Gregg Kirk, that's spelled GreggKirk.com. Click on the events link, or there you can reach out to me. Just click the contact button and we can start talking if you want a personal individualized session. So today we have our topic today is dying lessons, which sounds kind of dramatic, but that's maybe partially because of what is going on in our culture right now, centering around the idea of physical death. Let me get this going here to share the screen and we can start talking about it more intelligently. For those of you who are listening to this as a podcast, we're sharing a screen with visuals. So if you would like to see this, you can come to our website, wakingupspiritually.com, and click the broadcast link, or if you're on YouTube, just do a search for Waking Up Spiritually and look for dying lessons. That's our topic today. So what do we mean by this? We're not being coy. We're saying that actually, especially in our westernized society, that maybe we should take a look at the way we're dying right now. If we're passing with grief or regret or fear, is there a way that we could do better? So that's exactly what we're looking at. So this topic really came to a head in 1969 when an author named Elizabeth Kubler-Ross published a book called On Death and Dying. So you may not be familiar with her book, but you're more than likely familiar with her stages of grief. That was one of the major sections in this book to help people through the idea of dying. And these stages have become a part of popular culture and the modern cultural awareness as a reaction to all the grief and fear around physical death. So her stages were denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and ultimately acceptance. These were the stages that happened in a linear fashion as she noticed, and that as you can see, the denial, anger, bargaining, and depression that's a lot of resistance, a lot of what people would classify negative emotions until they get to the point of acceptance. In Western culture, death has always been seen as something to fear, especially for those who believe there is no afterlife. And we ask the question, is there a better way to die? Do you have anything to add to this, Wendy?
Yes, I'd like to add to it that those 5 stages of grief, they don't only apply to death. If you've had the death of a relationship, meaning a divorce or another loss, or lost a job that you just loved, or a home, those stages can also come up. And I'd also like to point out, it is not a straight line. We'd love for it to be a straight line and say, okay, I've gotten through the denial. I'm working on the anger. I'm working on releasing that. I realize I'm doing some bargaining. I feel depressed, but it doesn't work like that. You go back and forth, back and forth. It's much more of a zigzag.
Right.
As we peel that onion and come to that final stage of acceptance. So just wanted to add that, and just so glad that she wrote this book, because it really did change therapy and culture in many ways, as Gregg said.
Right. It was definitely a positive step forward. And And just to underline what Wendy's saying, these are the stages of grief, not stages of death. So grief is a huge part of culturally what we experience with the death experience, not just for yourself, but for all those around you. So these stages of grief, I believe she started to create them for people who were, given a cancer diagnosis or a terminal illness diagnosis, and they went through all of this. But the people around them, their loved ones also went through these stages that she noticed. So why is this going on in our culture? Well, we can kind of boil it down to this fight or flight instinct. Wendy and I have talked about this in past episodes. What is this? This is a natural instinct, resistance to dying it's in our DNA. We're programmed with this, It's a life-preserving instinct to keep us alive. So back in the days in prehistoric times, for those who are watching the PowerPoint or the visuals today, there's a caveman being chased by a saber-toothed tiger. And I would say fight or flight, came in handy during those times. But it can go into overdrive today. When you're driving to work, you're not being chased by, woolly mammoth, but you might still feel that level of anxiety if you have a monstrous boss who doesn't have saber teeth, but might, make you feel just as bad as if you are dying. So, if you stay in this fight or flight state of mind, this perpetual anxiety, not only does it lessen the quality of your life, it can start giving you health problems. So I think, there's been tons of research done in the past couple of decades to show what stress does to the body. One of the number one stressors is anxiety, which is a form of fear. You're afraid of something that might happen in the future. And you maintain this low level of fear in your body to the point where cortisol is raised, stress hormones start coursing through your body, and there's just bad health results not long after. You can't sustain those negative chemicals in your body for very long without having some sort of health implications. So these are culturally embedded emotions around the death state, fear, regret, grief, and loss. And that can make the death experience miserable, not just for the person dying, but for all those involved. And, it's the reason that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote her book. So I would like, Wendy and I talked about this experience. I'm going to tell you a real life experience now that it was the first time in my life that I actually watched somebody die, but I also had a very emotional reaction to what had taken place. And it was the first time. I was in my early 20s. I was working in a health club. And my reaction after watching this was, wow, that was really a jarringly negative experience. Was there a better way for that to happen? So let me tell you briefly what happened. So I worked in a health club. I sold memberships, and I helped people work out on the Nautilus machines and the workout machines. There was a men's side, and then there was a women's side. So when you walk into the front desk, you either went left to the men's side or you went right to the women's side. So the women worked out by themselves and the men worked out by themselves. So, everybody could feel comfortable that nobody was looking at them while they're working out. That was the main reason that happened. Spanning on the exterior wall around both sides were racquetball courts that you could see through. So they went across the men's side to the women's side. And I was standing at the desks on the men's side with my manager, and a woman manager from the women's side ran over to us and said, "There's a man down in court 3," which meant, he had collapsed, had some sort of health problem. So we ran in, and I watched the guy basically slump over, lean against the wall as he took his last breaths, and then he fell down on his back. And I noticed that from the neck up, his face was almost like eggplant color. So it was dark purple. So clearly something bad had happened to him. At the time I thought, well, did he have a heart attack or a stroke? I don't know. Not long after this, two young lifeguards ran into the room. These like 17-year-old kids. There was a pool in the back, and they were the lifeguards of the pool. They came in and they started doing CPR. One kid started pumping his chest. Another kid started giving him mouth to mouth. It gets a little gross here. So some sort of fluid came up from this man's abdomen and went into the mouth of the kid giving him mouth to mouth, and he started gagging, and he like kind of throwing up. And the other thing that was really unusual that I didn't know this happened, but as they were giving this guy breaths and then his chest was being compressed, sometimes air would come by his vocal cords. So he'd make this sound like kind of like, and we thought he was coming back to life, but actually it was not the case. It was just air going by. So anyway, at this point, several minutes had gone by, and then because there are open glass walls, people from the women's side could see what was happening. So a woman came in and she said, "I'm a nurse." And she saw that the young boy having a hard time gagging. She said, "I can continue giving mouth to mouth." So she started giving this man mouth to mouth. And so this was going on. And then after a few minutes, things kind of calmed down. So that was a lot of excitement all at once. And we just looked up. There was two other guys who had been playing racquetball with this gentleman who had collapsed. And it was strange. They were just in a daze. They were literally walking in circles around us. Just like it was the strangest thing. They were like in a daze. So my manager said to them, like, well, what was this man's name? Did he have any health problems? As soon as they said his name, the back of the woman who was giving mouth to mouth straightened, and she screamed, "Oh my God, this is my father." So she didn't know she was giving mouth to mouth to her father because of the discoloration that had happened. Turns out he had had an aneurysm, and all the blood immediately went to his face. He was not recognizable because everything changed. His features looked different. She started screaming, and one of the other gentlemen in my group started to pull her away. So she was freaking out. Not but a few seconds later, it turns out this man's wife was there as well. And she walked into the room, understood what the situation was going on, looked down at her husband, and she just completely collapsed. I thought that was something that happened in the movies. Like, she passed out by what she saw. Within a few more minutes, paramedics came, and this was like a scene from Pulp Fiction. They had this giant adrenaline needle. They drove it right into his heart, and he didn't respond. And then one of the paramedics said, we're pretty sure he had an aneurysm, and he was probably dead when he hit the floor. So all this stuff that you guys did, it was nice that you did it, but don't beat yourself up. You couldn't have saved his life. So they carried him off, and we left. And when it was all over, another young guy who was my age, we looked at each other and said, "That's the most violent thing I've ever seen." That was very upsetting. And a lot of it, he was dead, when we walked into the room. And look at all of this wild stuff that went on, all this horrible, coincidences that his daughter was given, it was just, so I walked away from that, just thinking, wow, what can we do better with this? Is there a different way that this man could have died, or could we have reacted differently? So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up. Wendy, what do you think?
Yeah, that's so hard to unpack because everyone was doing their best to be a good Samaritan. I'd love to know what the soul contracts were, if any, related to this, because of his daughter being there and not realizing that she was working on her father, for instance. I mean, it's just really, as you said, so upsetting, and such a harsh scene for all these young people to have gone through. Again,
Right.
Everyone's doing their best to be a good Samaritan, but this was decades ago, and you can only have so much training. And 911 was called, but they just they can't be there in an instant. And my goodness,
Yeah,
really dramatic.
It was hard to unpack, like you said, and it was hard to make sense of it for years. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up. I don't know, it's kind of almost an open question. Like, was there a better way for that to happen? And
Right.
like you said, maybe there's some energetic things going on in the background with soul contracts or things like that. But
Right. 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 Okay. Well, I'd like to share some stories and examples. Boy, I shouldn't go after Greg's. We should have done these in a different order. My belief is we do pre-life planning before we come in as souls, because I believe our soul always wants to progress, and that we can plan 3 to 5 exit points is the numbers I've heard again and again and again in different client sessions, in my own meditation. So that's just the typical. There's always exceptions, but that was quite the, if that was one of his planned exit points, which it certainly was, that was the full drama exit point. My goodness.
right.
My goodness. So I had a very different experience about 6 or 7 years ago, where I had a beautiful, peaceful, uplifting, shared deathbed afterlife experience with my uncle. And he was passing at home. He had been in a nursing home and had been going downhill pretty sharply for the last 6 months or so of his life. And he didn't want to be in the nursing home. All he wanted was to go home. He wanted to be back in his lovely house, which was right on the water. And he just kept asking to go home. And thankfully, his wife was able to arrange for hospice once they knew that he was terminal and it was a matter of days. So they brought him home and had a hospital bed, and they put it in the living room so he could look out on the ocean. And he was just so happy by all reports with that. And both his daughters and one of his son-in-laws were all able to come from out of state and to visit. And afterwards, his wife described the hospice nurse as an angel. And she just said it really was so much support for the family as well as for the person passing on. So what happened for me was one morning I'm asleep. The alarm hasn't gone off for work yet. It's a weekday. And I wake up because my cat Midnight is standing like right on my chest in bed. So that wakes me up. And I'm like, gosh, why are you standing there? That's very uncomfortable. That's unusual. And when I moved him off me and asked him why he was doing that, he kept staring in this one corner of my bedroom, in the far left corner of my bedroom. So I tuned in. I just, raised our vibration and put protection around Midnight and I, and tuned in and looked and said, oh my gosh, it's my Uncle Jack. Uncle Jack has come to visit. And I asked him how he was, and he said, oh, I feel great. I'm leaving. I'm passing on, and it feels so great to be getting out of that body. And we just had the nicest conversation. I could see him, Gregg, de-aging before my eyes. He was just no longer in the broken down body of a man in his 80s who wasn't able to walk on his own anymore. Was taking 2 attendants to get him up and out of bed to go to the bathroom even. I mean, there just really wasn't quality of life left. And when I blinked and I looked at him again, he looked like he was in his late 40s. It was just wild. And he was wearing, he had on like this t-shirt, and he had on these cut-off denims that he used to wear in the late 70s when I was in high school. And that was kind of like a high point in our relationship, because he used to come over to our house a lot, and he would come over after work a lot of days. He was single at the time, and he'd come over and visit us, and just have his after work beer and just come over and visit. So I realized he was like kind of sharing that time again. And I asked him if he wanted any help going home, if he wanted any help walking home. And he said, yeah, let's practice that once. I said, I sense it's going to be really easy for you, but let me practice doing that with you once. So we walked home, and I knew I could only go to a certain point, and I gave him a hug and said goodbye. And I was not surprised to get a call at work about 3 or 4 hours later, and I heard that he had passed on that morning at about 7 a.m. and I had seen him at about 6 a.m. So he was doing kind of his farewell tour, because my cousins also talked about dreaming about him that night. For them, it was a dream, and for me, it was a lucid experience. I woke up because midnight woke me up. So that was really a lovely death, because he got to go home to his home that he so loved on the Outer Banks in North Carolina, and to be there by the water and just to get to go home to the light. I thought was very, very symbolic.
Yeah.
So, any comments on that, Gregg?
Well, so doing the death tour, I've had other relatives and other friends of mine who have experienced exactly what you're saying, where they wake up and then they see the person. Sometimes they don't even know they're in the state of dying, where
Right.
they'll see them at the foot of their bed saying, "Hey, I just want to say goodbye." Very vivid vision.
Yes.
Sometimes it's in a dream, but I know a couple of people have had a very similar experience to you, where they look like they're there.
Yes.
So this is not an uncommon thing for a being to do. Somebody who's passing is
Yes.
to just kind of say their final goodbyes, which I agree, it's a
Yes.
beautiful thing. It's very,
It
very,
is.
that's the way to do it.
I think it's amazing that our souls can do that. It's just a really big deal to
Yeah,
share that experience.
yeah.
And I'd also like to talk about my brother's childhood death. I had a younger brother, Gregg. So same name, but spelled with one G,
No.
and Gregory John. And he was about 3 years younger than me. And my brother was born with microcephaly. So his brain never grew. So he was severely developmentally disabled. He was not going to get better. And there really was nothing that could be done for him. So that, of course, was really hard on my parents. And he was cared for at home for about the first year. And my parents didn't realize at first. He wasn't diagnosed right at birth, because this was in the early 60s, mid 60s. And my mother noticed he was missing milestones. And when she brought it up with the pediatrician, he said, well, every child's different. You can't compare your son to your daughter. But by about 6 months of age, it was obvious. There was no arguing the point anymore, because he wasn't able to roll over, sit up. He just was not interacting, and it was not moving in the same ways. He just really was remaining a baby. So he was institutionalized at an amazing place when he was about a year old. And we were able to visit him regularly. It was close enough to our house that we could go there and take him outside and spend time with him. He passed on when he was about 9 years old, 8 or 9 years old, and I was 11. And what was the curveball to that was he died in the institution, which again, we just loved and were so grateful for, to have him there. But the ball got dropped in notifying my parents that Gregg had died. And I don't know what happened, but he passed on, and he was actually buried in the cemetery that this family had for their own family. And they had purchased a large plot and a large corner of this lovely little cemetery in Austin, Quebec. And they had purchased this large corner, and they had buried other children that had been there in their institution also, because many of the children sadly had been abandoned there and had been abandoned to their care, and they were not being paid for their care. We were paying for my brother to be there, but they really considered them their children in many ways. So it was kind of just part of the routine that they were also then, as necessary, arranging for burials there in their own plot. But just, signals got crossed, and my parents weren't notified that Gregg had passed on until he had already been buried. So this was kind of a double shock to them, because they're not only getting, this phone call out of the blue, that he had passed on from pneumonia, not that surprising, bedbound for a lifetime, and not able to ambulate or move, but that he had been buried already. So that took away, in some ways, it's very hard to go through that process of arranging for, what type of service you might want to do, if you want to do a service, what type of burial, what type of headstone, all those things. But I think it's part of helping you move through the grief process to have to manage those decisions and make those. Whereas for my parents, it was like, it was a fait accompli. It was already done. So honestly, as they talked about it, and as I understood the parents, because I was a child at the time, but as they talked about it later, they said they wouldn't have done anything differently. He was buried in a wonderful place. We didn't have like a family plot where everyone was together that he was missing from, or anything else like that. And it's a beautiful little cemetery that my dad and stepmom still live near it, and are able to, to visit. So, but as I said, it just had that shock value of, he's not only dead, he's already been buried.
Right.
So any comments on that, or shall I keep on going?
Yeah, no, that is an unusual situation, but your family handled it really well, I think. So
Yes, well, thank you. And for those of you who are able to view it, I included a picture of me holding Gregg and supporting him. He's probably about maybe 5 months old or so in the picture, I would say. And I had an unrelated, very interesting spiritual experience. It was a year ago, January 1st. It was New Year's Day, and I was sleeping, and I was woken up because I could hear this incredible sound. It was like this siren song is the best way I can describe it. Anyone who's read the Iliad about the mermaids and their siren song. And what I was feeling too, as I woke up going, what is that sound? It was like this deep hum, but it was just the feeling of being called home. I could feel my soul actually being sucked out of my body and going toward it right outside my window, which was why I woke up. And I said to my guy, and I immediately grounded and again, cleared and protected my energy, and sat up in bed and said to my guides, what is that sound? What is that pull? And what they said to me is, that's the death crone. The death crone is here for a neighbor that's nearby to you. And what they're doing, this is a way of passing on, meant to ease it for people, meant to help them. And they can hear, it was just this beautiful, low, like I said, irresistible song, because I was like, woo, like out of my body. And I'm like, nope, that's not for me. So I put myself right back in my body. But it was just this pull was really amazing. And again, it was very peaceful. It was very gentle. It was just incredibly, incredibly inviting. And I thought, what a beautiful thing to have your way home be sung for you like that. So it just was a really, really unique experience. And I'm glad that I was able to understand from my guides what it was. And they reminded me, we have the triple goddess. There is the triple goddess. There's a cycle of life. And there's the maiden, and there's the mother, and there's the crone. I mean, that's just the cycle of life for women. And what a shame that there is so much, fighting of it, and so much grief and just such, such a seeing of it as a tragedy that someone is passing on. So it's just really interesting. There's other cultures that do death so much better than the typical Western culture. I love how people in both death and dying, I love how people in the Jewish tradition sit Shiva for 7 days, where they call everyone together. And I think there's a lot of laughter and reminiscing, or think of like the Irish wake. Think of a really raucous, fantastic storytelling, whether it's in a bar or whether it's in the home. But we used to have this be more of daily life. Both birth and death used to be more of daily life, and we were more hands-on with it. It hadn't yet been institutionalized, and we hadn't put it away behind closed doors and medicalized it. That's probably not a word. Hospitalized it, put it away like that. So any comments there, Gregg?
Yeah, there's something interesting about the funeral parades in New Orleans. So New Orleans is a melting
Yes.
pot of a lot of different cultures, from African to Caribbean to French to Italian.
Yes.
They have two lines in the parade. The first line is the somber, slow dirge, full marching band, but playing a sad song. And then there's what's called the second line. And that's that's the celebration of life. And some of the greatest music in New Orleans comes from the second line rhythms, from the second line of the death parade, the funeral parade. So
That's amazing. I love that concept, because we do need to release the grief. I mean, grief is a very real human emotion. So how perfect, that there's the grief first, and then the celebration. So one of my privileges, because I get the privilege of journeying to the light a lot more than most people do, because I go with clients so often during their sessions. And a lot of them tell me that was the unexpected thing that they were, didn't know could happen, is that they released their fear of death, because they much more sort of saw the cycles, because we went back through some scenes earlier in this lifetime, perhaps, or perhaps we spent our time exploring their past lives, maybe a parallel, maybe even a future, but they much more see and appreciate that cycle of life that I mentioned, that the triple goddess with the maiden mother crone represents. And often the fear of death, it's not actually the fear of death per se, but it can be more a fear of being in pain, and not being able to tolerate the pain, or the fear of being alone. Because again, being back behind closed doors, and look at what COVID has done to the dying process. Oh my goodness. That loved ones just can't gather in the same way that they might have gathered in hospice or in a hospital setting, and that there's just the medical personnel there, and look at what a toll it's taking on them. So looking forward to some different stages and some better answers again.
So kind of pivoting on something Wendy just said here, those who have gone through a death experience and come back, we call them near-death experiences, or NDEs, show a lot of remarkable similarities and are providing some glimpses for people after they do come back of what happens when the physical body begins to die. Well, spoiler alert, they all report great experiences. So to the point where a lot of them don't want to come back because it feels so great and they're having such a great time. The first thing that happens is, when somebody's usually on their deathbed, they're in a lot of pain, or they're being sedated, or, they're massively injured, you name it. They're in a bad physical situation. When they leave their body, well, that's the first thing they notice. Wow, I'm not in pain. I feel light. I feel no pain. I feel good. And then they start to notice their surroundings, and there's all these amazing beings, these angelic beings, there's light, there's colors they've never seen before. They feel the presence of love. It's, why would you want to leave that? So that's what we have to look forward to. I just want everybody who's listening today to understand that's the death experience. It's beautiful. It's the lead up that's all the scary stuff, right? So we need to understand that the ending is the best part. So another thing, I said earlier, for people who fear death as being the final answer, that you don't, that's it. Your physical body dies, end of story, full stop. Well, there's documentation now showing, especially in the University of Virginia, that in the Division of Perceptual Studies, they have documented at this point more than 3,000 cases of reincarnation. And we're talking about cases where young children, as soon as they could speak, start talking about things like fixed wing aircrafts and how the aircraft works. And these kids are like 2 or 3 years old. No way they could know this stuff. And that's just, one example. Or another example where a young kid starts talking about brothers and sisters that they have, and the life that they had, the career, and these are, 3 or 4 year old kids talking about their careers.
Or their spouse.
Or their spouses. And then if these people are alive, they meet them, so I've seen plenty of documentaries from this University of Virginia where they so people young kids who are like 6, 7 years old, this is when it's one of those things, this happens a lot. There seems to be a window of time with your physical perception, like between the ages of like 18 months or 2 years when you start to talk to about 6 or 7. That's when you have the most memory of this. And then as you get older, it starts to kind of go away. In one case in particular, a young boy talked about his sister. Well, it turns out his sister was still alive. So they found out, he remembered the sister's name. They found out he was in the military. They looked up and he remembered the name of his ship that he was on. Well, they found his name. They found they tracked down his sister. They contacted her. They put him on the phone with her, and he said something about a portrait that they had kept in the attic. I mean, it was something that nobody could have known, and she had it. And so when they actually met in person, like she gave him the portrait or a picture or something of their mother. And, that's not something that you could fabricate, is my point. And it shows that we do come back. It's the physical death state is not the end of the story. You continue going. So, those who have passed on often reached out to loved ones, like we talked about, to confirm their continued existence. And so, I have a few, I won't go into very many stories, but I'll just kind of give you a gloss over. So one of the things I do is energy work. And sometimes sometimes beings who have passed on, loved ones, do come through. Doesn't happen all the time, but there's been several cases, where we do these sessions, and in some cases people come to me because they hear that this might happen. So, I had one woman who, it was a one and done situation. She came to me because she heard that this might be a possibility that we can bring up her mother. And her mother had passed, and she had been gone for about 2 years. And what brought things up, the grief back to this woman, was she had some ice cream in her freezer. The last time she had the ice cream was with her mother. So this ice cream had stayed in the freezer for 2 years. And she decided one day, I got to throw this away. So she threw it away. She said, Greg, I felt like I was throwing my mother away and my memories with her. And I said, oh, that's so sad. So she was still hanging on to the grief. So we did the energy session. Her mother came through. Now, it's funny. This experience I'm about to relay is what happens most of the time. So the first thing that happened was the mother said, please stop grieving for me. You're making yourself sick. I'm worried about you. and the young woman said, I'm worried about my mother. I hope she's in a good place. The mother said, I'm fine. You're the one who needs to calm down. I'm worried about you. And then the woman said, but I'm also so sad. My daughter, you used to see her all the time and now you don't see her. And she said, are you kidding me? I see her whenever I want. I see her more now than I did when I was in a physical body. So calm down about all this stuff. Live your life. Know that I'm always there. And then she gave some advice, like next time you're alone in a room and you want to talk to me, or if you feel sad, if you're still hanging on to this grief, give it to me. Call my name out when you're alone and just give me your grief. I'll take it. I know what to do with it over here. And I thought
That's
that
beautiful.
right. So I've heard that more than once in when these experiences have happened. And that is the common theme. Stop grieving. You're making yourself miserable. Don't do it. They're fine. They're looking over.
They're fantastic.
Right. They're doing better than us. Okay. Let's face it. So don't worry about them. And if there is ever a time where, it's understandable to miss somebody in the physical form, that's pretty normal. You miss that. Yeah, that's understandable. But if it's starting to interrupt your life, one of the things you can do is when you're alone in your room, you call the person that you're missing and say, here, put it in a big ball or a box, whatever you want to visualize, and hand your grief over to them. They'll take it. They can deal with it much better over there. So, all right. Yeah. Let's, do you have anything to add to that, Wendy?
No, just that's wonderful. That is so true, that our loved ones are just around us. I literally dreamed about my maternal grandmother last night, and it was just kind of subtle how she came in and she was handing over this file folder, and invited me to look in it. And I could see this distinctive type. I knew it was from her manual typewriter. I know
Awesome.
that type because we have old family recipes on them. So I
Cool.
recognize it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, my grandmother was here. That was just so cool.
Right.
But yes, that's a wonderful recommendation to just give it over like that, because yes, they want us to enjoy now and just remember them fondly,
Yes.
and just do our best we can to move forward in appropriate ways. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying life is the same,
Right.
particularly if you've lost a child, but you can and deserve to be happy again.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about some recommendations, some things that we've learned, some things that we've read about, some things that can make this a better situation. So, the first thing is, I had my mother-in-law was passing. She had got an illness and she passed fairly quickly in about 3 or 4 weeks. So in a lot of ways that made that experience better, because, I've just heard bad stories about people who have slowly gone, from a terminal illness, and it's taken months and months, and they've been in the hospital and it's been rough. So this was not like that. But as this started to look like we didn't know if this was a health experience or a death experience. And as it began to look like a death experience, a friend of mine said to me, because I was saying to this person, wow, it looks like this is going to be it. And this is making everybody sad. And this person who's a healer said, yes, that's how it can be. Or you can make it beautiful. And it was like a revelation. I'm like, I can? Oh, wait a minute. How can I make it beautiful? So as best I could, I tried to be supportive and tried not to be, just dwell in the grief and anything that was going on during the time. And just a quick story. So I'd been spending time with my mother-in-law during the past few weeks. And a lot of times I was alone with her. And I was doing energy healing on her, and then it was kind of a frustrating thing, but it was it was a great lesson for me as an energy healer, because it was to her time to go, right? So anything that I did only raised or got her symptoms away for a few hours, and then she was back right on track to leave. And at first I thought, oh, I'm not able to help her. And then, I started to kind of beat myself up about it. But then I realized nothing, there's nothing, she's on schedule. I'm not going to resurrect her out of this situation. So that was a
But
good book.
energy can be used to help people pass. It's
That's
just,
what I learned. Exactly.
just
That's
give it
yes.
in an unrestricted way, just for ease and grace, and then just let go of.
Right. That's what it ended up transitioning to me helping to escort her out. So anyway, the final experience was the day that the hospital called us and said, we think she's ready. So they started to crank up her morphine so she would not be in pain. They took her off the breathing apparatus, and a lot of relatives were there. And because I had already spent time around her, I stayed to the foot of her bed, and everybody else was getting their time with her, holding her hand. And I was standing in the back of the room with my sister-in-law, and we were just kind of quietly chatting. And then all of a sudden I felt this wave of heat come over my left side and just hit me. It was so noticeable that I said to her, "Oh my God, did you feel that?" Well, no, she didn't. But then I couldn't speak, because what I realized, I think I said it out loud to her. I said, the relatives are here, meaning all of these ancestors had come into the room. It was the time. It was overwhelmingly positive experience.
I've
Now,
got such chills from that. I can feel that all down my shoulders and back, like the support that was there.
It was hundreds. And it was so
Wow.
overwhelming that when I experienced it, as I do with these things, it makes me weep. It raises my emotions up, so I can't speak. So I kind of wobble over to the corner and I curl up, and I'm just, reacting to this unbridled, unconditional love. And it's making me like, like I couldn't speak. And so now everybody's coming over to me. Oh my God, Gregg, you're in grief. I'm like, no, go back to Gigi. I'm fine. She's gonna be fine. Everything's happening the way it should. And then once I pulled myself together, I went and I sat by her. I closed my eyes and I just held space for her. And I saw this beautiful golden and yellow spiral going up. Hundreds of her relatives, guides, ancestors. She was walking up the spiral apparatus to go, the blinding light at the top of it. So it was incredible. So that was a beautiful experience. Now, sometimes in these hospital situations, when you have a lot of relatives around you and the person is conscious, they can linger on a bit long. It can keep these people who should be passing, they don't die right away and they stay in pain. This happened to a grandmother-in-law of mine who she had very bad cancer. She was in agony. She just wasn't dying. And then this is when we found out about there's such a thing as something called a death doula. So doulas are somebody who can help
usher.
Help the birth. A regular doula is somebody who helps a woman bring in, a birth, helps assist the birth, helps with breastfeeding, care of the child, all that kind of stuff. The death doula is the opposite. Helps the person who is dying and the family have a great, a softer experience. So this death doula came in. This was back in the 70s. We didn't know, or maybe early 80s. We didn't know this was a possibility. Literally all this woman did was she spoke very quietly and softly and sweetly into my grandmother-in-law's ear and more or less said, "It's okay. You don't have to hold on anymore. You can go." She didn't know that. She was hanging on for dear life, literally, and it was causing her agony. As soon as within 15 minutes of this woman saying, "It's okay, we're all okay with you leaving," she passed. It was instantaneous almost. So, death doulas are a good thing. If you have a bunch of relatives who are kind of really clinging on to somebody and not wanting them to pass, but you can see it's really that person's time to go, death doula might be a good idea. Before I move on, so this is the focus on if somebody else is passing. So is there anything you want to add to this, Wendy, on any
No,
advice?
that's just wonderful. That's so beautiful that you were able to see that process with your mother-in-law passing. That's just a really big deal. And it just makes me keep thinking of, if it's hard to even entertain the idea of reincarnation, well, go to physics. Energy can't be destroyed. It just
Right.
takes on another form.
Exactly. Yes. Well, let's talk about you. What if you are dying? So this is one of those things where hopefully you can you can feel or accept the fact that, I mean, first of all, let's just face it, we're all going to do this. Nobody gets out
Many
alive.
times.
Nobody gets out alive, right? So if you can soften the idea of course you're going to pass, why not do it in a way that is actually enjoyable? Yes, I said it. It can be an enjoyable situation. So, I know the Buddhists have a particular set of chants that they do. But
Does that help raise the spirit up?
yes.
Mhm.
So one of the goals to doing this is to bring your consciousness with you. And you can, if you want, bring your memories with you so that when you have your next incarnation, you can remember a lot of this life. Because let's face it, it's pretty daunting to start a new life when the slate is wiped clean and you're starting from scratch every time. Why don't we get better at this? Let's get better at this as incarnate, human beings. Let's start bringing some of our memories with you. How do you do that? So the advice that I've heard is to start by just being mindful of your surroundings right now. Like even before you die, start being more mindful of all the details in your life, in the room that you're in now. Start looking around and looking at all the details. The more you become mindful and aware of your situation, you can start bringing it with you. So when you're ready to pass, be aware that, okay, you're ready to go. Do it without regret and bring as much of your own energy. Hopefully, I mean, for those who are healers, this is easier to do. You bring all of your energy in your upper chakras and begin to move it, and then ultimately let it center in where your third eye is. So hopefully everybody understands who's listening to this. Your third eye is your mind's eye. It's driven by the center of your brain. It's the pineal gland, but it's the area of focus is just above the bridge of your nose. Put all of your energy in your third eye right as you're passing. And we'll get even more technical than that. There is something called the Emerald Tablets. This was written, nobody knows exactly when it was written. It was supposedly written by a man named Hermes Trismegistus. Sorry if I didn't get that right. It means Hermes, the triple great. He was an alchemist. He was a magus, a magician. He wrote a lot of amazing things, but basically, and he compiled a lot of hidden and ancient knowledge. And one of the things that he talks about is he gives you words that you can say. So the Buddhists have these chants that you can do. From the Emerald Tablets, they have these two words. The first word that he recommends you say as you are beginning to pass is Doriula. Doriula. And then after you have passed, when you are still connected or disconnected from your body and you are in that first initial state, usually your guides will be, or your loved ones will be coming around you, you can utter the words La Ilgen and go to wherever you want to go. This is another, let me just talk about some technicalities. I've heard in the past 10 years that the usual advice has been go to the light, right? And Wendy, maybe you've heard this too. And then I've also heard that that's actually not the thing to do. I mean, you certainly have the choice to go to the light, to go down the tunnel, go into the light, and you go to your loved ones. From what I'm understanding, and maybe this is true or not true, that's where you go to kind of get recycled and go through another lifetime. If you don't want to do that, if you want to go somewhere else, you say La Ilgen and you go elsewhere. And you go to maybe another place, a place where you create a world of your own. You can do that. Let's be magical beings. Let's not be limited beings. So anyway, Wendy, do you have anything to add? Any kind of advice or recommendations for those who are actually the ones doing the passing?
I think that that's well said. My belief system's a little bit different. I personally believe we should go up to the light, to home, up to the divine, up to source, whatever feels right for you, your belief system, what's there in your heart. So use different terms for it.
Right.
I believe we have free will and we can remain there. I don't believe we're, quote, recycled, meaning sent back down to earth against our will. I think that's a fallacy that is out there on the internet pretty strongly of don't go to the light because it's a trap.
Right. That's what I've heard. Yeah.
That does not resonate for me personally.
Right.
So
I never knew what to think about that, but Tom Kenyon did a meditation a while ago, and he didn't say anything about he stayed away from that controversy of whether you get recycled or not. But he said you do have a choice to go wherever you want. So yeah, of course you can go to the light, but there might be some other cool places that you can go to. And so investigate that. He basically said just look around you when you pass, and you may see some other options, of course, that are just as thrilling. So, yeah,
anything's possible.
We're beings of free will, absolutely. Yep.
Yes.
So, we have come to the end of our broadcast today, Wendy. Thank you for joining me.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you for putting together the slide deck, Greg. So please, listeners, join us on February 27th for the next Waking Up Spiritually podcast. We'd love to have suggestions, recommendations. What's hard for you? What are you struggling with? What would you like more information on? We've done some previous podcasts based on specific listener recommendations. And join us on Facebook. Go to Facebook and look for the Waking Up Spiritually group. And you're welcome to join Greg and I and other members of that group there and just have some great conversations. And as Greg mentioned, you can also go to wakingupspiritually.com and click on the broadcasts tab. And there you'll find all the different broadcasts that we have done of this program, including the PowerPoints. You can also subscribe to our YouTube if that's easier, if that's how you like to get your media. And please rate and review us on Apple iTunes. You will find us on the different apps. And you can visit Gregg at his website, Gregg, Kirk, KIRK.com. Highly recommend sessions with Gregg. I've had many sessions with him. They're super fun for he and I to do together. Because Gregg, you tend to be really clairvoyant, so you're really seeing, and I'm really clairaudient, so I'm hearing. So it's like we've got the two halves of the TV program together.
Right. Yep.
So it's just really fun, but just so helpful. And also want to mention Gregg's book is fantastic, The Gratitude Curve. I just sent the link for it to someone a day or two ago because I thought it would help her with what she was describing. Please visit me at my website, which is wendyrosewilliams.com. And you're welcome to request a complimentary 15-minute phone appointment there. And we can explore how I might be of service to you, whether it might be a past life regression or another type of healing session, or whether you're looking for a spiritual teacher and would like to do a 3-month program, a 12-month program. Let's design something specific for you and just get you feeling great. So thank you again so much for being here today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.